begin to have that conversation about accessibility for blind and visually impaired individuals, I think a place to start is just awareness, just being aware as a person who is able to see just how visual centric our world is. You know, we can walk through the world, we see that the light has changed colors. We can read what's on the movie marquee. We can open the menu at the restaurant and just readily be able to make a selection. But for people who are blind and visually impaired, it's not that easy. That's why accommodations need to be made, such as at a crosswalk, having a talking device that gives that audio alert that allows them to hear. They hear that beep that lets them know how much time they have to get across the street.
First of that is making sure that the textbooks that are being assigned are accessible. One of the biggest things that we hear coming back from students is that if there's graphics or if there's charts, that there's no way for their technology to read that particular graphic to them. So making sure that if you are providing an online textbook, that you are including alt text, that you have audio descriptions, or that you might just provide the text in general to the student and not a PowerPoint presentation, so that it's easier for them to be accessible.
But it takes effort to do that. One has to intentionally be inclusive of individuals who are blind, visually impaired. I don't think it just happens. Again, as sighted folk, we just take these things for granted within the world. But for someone who is facing the challenge of not being able to see anything or see however many feet in front of them, things are blurry, whatever that condition may be, that kind of accessibility means everything. I mean, it can mean the difference between participating or not participating, staying home, holding back. So it's really incumbent on planners of classrooms, of public spaces, to make things accessible. There are organizations who are being intentional and who have reached out to Lighthouse for the Blind of Fort Worth with a little help in making things accessible. For instance, the Amon Carter Museum has worked with us to create some awareness around alt text.
So alt text for me is incredibly important. As a student, I rely on a variety of images depending on what class I'm taking. Specifically the math courses, there will be graphs and diagrams in which it's very important to get across the key information as quickly as possible, especially on like a timed test or even when studying for my textbook.
I remember lots of times things that were not described, and so were left out because there's no description. There is no description. So slowly started to see a little more on websites, a little more on Facebook, a little more. But again, it depends on who's ever creating the post, who's ever designing the website. It's very subjective to whoever's involved, right? Because they don't think about us when they're doing this.
The alt text can be helpful in, I think there's two schools of thought. There's the narrative descriptions that are very helpful, that kind of describe the image in its entirety and help you understand some of the abstract information about it. Like if it's a picture of a flower, it tells you that the flower is red, that it's got 4 petals, just visual narrative things. Then the other side of it is the utilitarian aspect. If I am looking through my photos on my phone, I want to know that it's a picture of a flower. So it doesn't help me to hear that there's while it might help me, and it might be nice to know that there's a beautiful background with green grass, for some purposes, I just really care that it's a flower, if that makes sense.
Kimball Art Museum also very intentionally doing things to be inclusive of individuals who are blind, visually impaired. So, for instance, this Monet painting, which they have created this tactile version, also having the scent of what this might smell like. It's an oceanscape, and so having the scent of what this might be, and having some driftwood like that is in the painting, so that someone could feel, oh, well, this might be what the driftwood, this is what it feels like, so I can imagine what it might look like in that painting.
So O&M brain, right? We really like right angles, 90-degree angles, sometimes 45 degrees, but like measurable turns. And at universities that I have seen, those don't exist. There's like a big circle and it's like a ray of sidewalks coming off of it. Well, that's kind of like the Hunger Games, right? How do you know which sidewalk is the right sidewalk that you want to take to get to your little island or your classroom building? And so that's really hard on university campuses, is making sure that there is a clearly marked route, sidewalk, from point A to point B that is easy to find, easy to follow, especially when you have a crowd of, however many hundreds of students walking through the campus at the same time that you're trying to get from one building to the next. So those are big issues, are clearly marked sidewalks, clearly marked hallways. One of the campuses in Denton specifically, it's really difficult, and I understand, like when I was a student, we wanted places to kind of little nooks and sitting areas to sit in, read, take a nap, do our homework, converse with our friends. But looking at it from the O&M view, we call it clutter. If you're walking down the hallway and there's benches and chairs and tables and this and pillars and things like that, it's all clutter. Because, here's your hallway and, going forward in front of you, and if you have all this cluttery stuff to your left and the right, if you veer into it, it's almost like you've gone into quicksand or the jungle and you have to like navigate yourself back out of it. And it can get very frustrating at times, especially if you're running late to class.
So there are things that we can intentionally do to make things more accessible for BVI community, such as you'll notice when you go into an elevator, there by the floor buttons, there's generally a little bit of Braille. In schools, other office buildings, signage oftentimes will have a little bit of Braille. Oh, the men's room, there's a little Braille to let them know. Other things that we can do is using tactile elements. Last year, Lighthouse for the Blind of Fort Worth very intentionally set out to create a blind accessible interactive mural. We worked with artist Kristen Sobel, who is a Fort Worth-based muralist, and she created an amazing work on a 2,000 square foot wall. Some of the things that we did to really make this accessible for everyone, she used very high contrast colors. That is something that is very important for people who have low vision, to be able to differentiate shapes and other things. When there's a nice high contrast color, it makes that easier for that person to take in that information. We also included 6 talking devices that go throughout the mural that allow for an audio description of what might be before the person in that section. So there was only a 30-second allowance on that time, so it goes pretty quickly. But we made up for that in the companion website that is accessed through a QR code at the beginning of the mural. So someone who's using a screen reader, we made a much longer, much more detailed description of each section. Additionally, there are stainless steel railings that we put in across the mural. On those railings, we included Braille messages, things like, "Your mission is not just to survive, but to thrive." There's other parts of the mural that have been sort of outlined with, well, Kristen used caulk. At the end of this mural, what we've done is we created a miniature replication of the entire mural down into a 3D relief so that the person is able to kind of feel where the objects are, so they can take the entire thing in at one time. Whereas we're able to just stand back and see it and go, wow, what a beautiful piece of work. This allows for someone who's blind, visually impaired, to do that same thing. Then we also installed some very bright LED lighting for nighttime so that the mural really just jumps off the wall and into the darkness.